Hello and welcome to the 2.1 cast. I'm your host, Neil Murray, and I'm joined by James. James, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Glad to hear it. And Stefan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very well as well, mate.
Excellent. Well, we're going to talk about Aberdeen and Stephen Glass. He's now been appointed boss at Pittodrie. It was obviously touted for the past few weeks that this was going to happen, and it's finally been confirmed. But before we crack on with that, we thought we'd roll out our resident Dandy Don, Andrew Southwick, who couldn't come on the podcast, just to share his thoughts briefly on the appointment and whether he's pleased with it or not.
Hello everyone. Sorry I can't be in the podcast today to argue with everyone, but I am otherwise engaged. I've been asked to give my view as a Dons fan on Aberdeen's appointment of Stephen Glass as manager. He wasn't my first choice. I wanted Max Allegri, and failing that, Frank Lampard. I was happy to give Roy Keane a go, and would also have waited for Jose Mourinho's inevitable sacking from Tottenham Hotspur. But Stephen Glass it is. Is it an exciting appointment? No, I doubt you'll see scenes in the news of thousands of Aberdeen fans gathering at Pittodrie to greet their returning hero, but I think it is an interesting appointment, and one I'm happy to get behind. The last 3 to 4 years at Aberdeen have been stale, too defensive, little entertainment, no real development of young players, just an over-reliance on loans, what had been pretty expensive transfers by Scottish standards. We wanted something different, and this is exactly that. A coach that has been learning his trade for 9 years, has played at top level, a guy who's worked under Ruud Gullit, Bobby Robson, Gianluca Vialli, Kenny Dalglish, Tony Mowbray, and laterally Frank de Boer and Gabriel Hines. If you look at CV, if he was Spanish or German, we'd be raving about the guy. But I think people can't see beyond the Dave Cormack and Atlanta friendship and believe it's a cheap option. Inexperience in management, yes, but then look at the Scottish Premiership. 5 managers are currently in their first jobs. 2 of them, Callum Davison and Steven Gerrard, have just won trophies. David Martindale has recently been touted for manager of the season. James Goodwin was being talked about for the Aberdeen job. Brian Rice too, if you take any notice of what Charlie Adams says. The whole coaching structure at Aberdeen needs an overhaul, and bringing in a guy who's been coaching for 9 years and his earmarked England striker coach Allan Russell being his backroom team suggests that's happening. Scott Brown is rumoured to be a player assistant, and it's caused a bit of controversy. In my view, a cracking player who adds to Aberdeen's playing squad even at the age of 36. He's a winner, a leader, something Aberdeen badly lacked this season. He's been working on his coaching badge for some time. I couldn't care less what he did in the Celtic shirt against Aberdeen. I think we need to be a bit more grown up here and accept what he'll bring to the club. So for me, thumbs up on Stephen Glass. A winner as a player at Aberdeen. Let's see if he can be a winner as a manager too.
Okay, so Stefan, I'll throw to you first thoughts on that. Andrew obviously quite pleased with the appointment. I get that there maybe could have been a bigger name. Maybe some Aberdeen fans wanted a bigger name or something slightly more, I think inspiring might be harsh than Stephen Glass, but what are your thoughts? Do you think it's a good move for Aberdeen?
Well, predictably, I'm probably not as optimistic as Andrew is, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm kind of torn between it, to be honest, because I've got absolutely no idea, what to expect from Stephen Glass as a manager, as a coach. He might do very well. I'd imagine Dave Cormack would have some idea of, what kind of coach he is, because it's not as if, Aberdeen are kind of picking him up from behind, some Iron Curtain or any sort of, it's not as if they've picked up some youth coach from a club that they don't know anything about. They'll know exactly what he's done at Atlanta United, I can't remember what it is. So they'll know exactly what his credentials are. They'll have first-hand experience of what he's done with the club there. So on one hand, that makes perfect sense. On the other, I do think it's by no means an inspiring, appointment. We've kind of spoke for weeks and weeks and months on end about whether Derek McInnes should or shouldn't, keep the job. There was kind of reports out that he was going to lose his job earlier in the year. It seemed as though Cormack kind of stepped away from the edge there and decided to stick with him for a little longer. So, he's had most of this season to kind of think about this decision, what to do after McInnes has left. There's no real excuse for him not to kind of cast the net out far and wide to find a successor to McInnes. And maybe Glass has ticked all those boxes. Maybe, he's just been kind of kept under wraps at Atalanta, and maybe Cormac always had the intention of bringing Glass in to move on the next step at Aberdeen, but on the surface it looks to me as though this is Cormac just kind of moving his pawns around within his kind of sporting empire here, and it doesn't really strike me as the most kind of in-depth search that they've made here. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is I really have no idea how good Glass is as a coach. I've got nothing against him. I hope and wish him all the very best at Aberdeen, but the fact that he's come from one of Cormac's other clubs and the fact that he doesn't really have any experience at this level as a manager, it just strikes me as a kind of quick fix, especially if, as the reports tonight suggest, that it is just a 12-month contract. It doesn't strike me as though Cormac is really building up, he's really putting the pieces in place here to begin a tremendous dynasty at Pittodrie.
I mean, on the flip side of that, James, and I do get what you're saying, Stefan, in terms of experience. I know Andrew in his kind of, we call it a monologue? Let's call it a monologue, a soliloquy, talked about how there's 5 other managers in the Premiership at the moment who are in their first jobs in management as well. But he is a bit of an unknown quantity, and there are managers out there who do have experience. So I guess that is one thing going against him. But on the flip side, James, even just looking at Dave Cormac's statement in the release announcing it on the Aberdeen website today, 2 things that were kind of mentioned that stood out to me were that Cormac said Stephen was the outstanding candidate due to his kind of role at Atlanta United in bringing through youth players, as well as the kind of philosophy and attacking style of football he plays, something that obviously has been missing in recent times under McInnes, and is part of a kind of strategy or philosophy Aberdeen have. Is that the kind of obvious upsides here? I don't know what you think, if you're in agreement with Stefan or not, that it's maybe a bit uninspiring, or there are plus points here.
No, I think there are plus points, to be honest. I think, like you say, with Cormac, talking about those are the reasons why Glass has been appointed. I think that, I mean, obviously, I don't know much about Stephen Glass, right? I don't know what he's like as a manager. I don't follow. Was it the Atlanta too? Is it the reserve?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't follow reserve American football, so I don't know, right? But if that is indeed like his skill set, if that is what he's renowned for, is developing youth players and playing attacking football, then those are 2 absolutely massive boxes that have been ticked at Aberdeen. I think the new manager, no matter who they were going to have to be, no matter who it was, they had to bring in, anything would have been an improvement in terms of attacking football and what was going on under McInnes towards the end. But I think that if they can get, Aberdeen have got the resources that within Scotland, they should be able to play attacking football and still do well. I mean, they're not, they've got a big budget, they can have expensive players, relatively speaking, and they should be able to play this attacking style of football against your teams in the bottom half and even plenty in the top as well. So I think that that'll be a huge box tick for the fans. That'll make them very happy, because it's no secret that how dire and how just dull things became under McInnes. So I think that sort of swinging from like one end of the pendulum to the other, one extreme to the other, that could go down quite well. And I think that even if the football on offer is entertaining but results aren't great to begin with, I think that Glass will probably still I'd imagine get a lot of goodwill just from not stifling games and stinking the place out. Certainly in terms of youth development, obviously that's absolutely massive for every club in Scotland, every single one of them. It doesn't matter if you're Celtic, you're Rangers, you're St Mirren or you're Stranraer. You need to be able to develop your own players and then sell them on for a bit of money. Aberdeen's business model is obviously I think that's maybe an area where over the last few years they've not done as well as they could have. And sometimes, you think of players, a lot of players have moved on for not very particularly big sums or on frees, which has been pretty criminal. So, yeah, I think as long as they've got, if Glass is going to be one of these guys that can take players like, a Lewis Ferguson or a Ross McCrory, maybe a Dean Campbell, and develop them into better players so that then Aberdeen can sell them. Get them on good contracts so that they're not going to get poached a lot as soon as their contracts expire. Sell them on for a bit of money. Then it's got to be good business. But I can understand why he's only been given a 12-month contract initially, just because he is relatively unproven. Obviously, particularly within Scotland. I mean, obviously we know who he is from his playing days. We know that he knows, he understands the football environment. But what we don't know is actually how closely he's been following football over the last 2, 3, 4 years in Scotland. So I can understand why there might be it will be seen as a gamble, because it is a wee bit outside the box. Personally, I think that kind of thing is good to see, to be honest. So I hope, like Stefan, I wish the guy well, and I want to see him. It'd be great to see him, really sort of grab Aberdeen by the horns and, sort of get them back on track. I think that overall, I think it probably is a good point. I think it's sensible. I think the 1 year contract is a good idea, personally, just because it might be a complete disaster. We don't know, and that way they've sort of got to get a jail free card. And equally, if he does well, 1 year at Aberdeen probably isn't enough to land you a bigger job unless you win the league or something. So I think it's a good deal for all parties involved.
I wonder as well if you've got to consider his finances playing a part in that as well. I mean, I don't know how much McInnes was paid when he was let go of there, and obviously it's been a difficult year for all clubs in Scotland because of the pandemic and the COVID situation. So you don't know if that comes into it, and that's why it's a 12-month contract. But I don't know if you think, Stefan, even if that's the case, I mean, I look at, and I think Andrew Southwick and I ended up doing this the last time we spoke about Aberdeen in an extra podcast, but I think it's quite a good comparison where you look at Rangers, right, and they gave Gerrard a multi-year contract because they were building something and gave him the time, which is obviously very rare in Glasgow. But would it not be, if it's possible and it isn't a financial thing, would it not be better for Aberdeen fans to see, and probably for Stephen Glass himself, to know he's got this kind of backing from the board for a long-term project, and we've kind of seen how that can work in the club's favour if it does work out like it did with Gerrard.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Rangers comparison is maybe quite an apt one, because in the case of Steven Gerrard and Rangers, not only did they bring in a young coach who they were hoping to build a project around, but they also put money in to build the overall project. They had investors, I guess the best way to put them, who were essentially keeping the club afloat until they got to a certain level. They allowed Gerrard to kind of flush out, or to kind of build up rather, his backroom team. Michael Beale's a perfect example of that, who certainly wouldn't have came cheap after working down in England. They gave him money to spend in the transfer window. They had a whole recruitment system put in place. I know for a fact that they even signed up to all sorts of kind of third-party performance companies. For example, they use one that basically helps them assess player injuries in terms of who they should and shouldn't be signing, and that also helps in terms of training, helps them avoid certain injuries in training, things like that. So Rangers invested a huge amount of money and infrastructure into Steven Gerrard when they hired him, and this is kind of my issue with the Stephen Glass appointment. There's mentions obviously that Scott Brown might be joining as assistant manager. There's obviously there's another assistant whose name I've completely forgotten, actually.
Allan Russell, yeah.
From down south. But my main kind of gripe with this as well is that the kind of main issue with Derek McInnes, and maybe why the whole thing kind of ran out of steam at Aberdeen at the end of his tenure, was that he was kind of holding that club together. He was the manager, he was the director of football, he was the head of recruitment. As far as we can tell, he was even a scout at best case scenario, or worst case scenario in some transfer windows. So I think a lot of Aberdeen fans will be probably looking at clubs like Hibs, who are obviously put a lot of money into and a lot of effort into recruiting, into the recruitment side of the club. Rangers as well, who Aberdeen fans obviously feel there's a degree of rivalry with, and I'm not really sure the appointment of Stephen Glass alone is really going to kind of quell that appetite. I think, and I'm not saying he should, obviously, there's still plenty, we're nowhere near the end of the transfer window, or end of the season by any means, and a lot can happen in the next couple of months. But if I was an Aberdeen fan, I'd be really hoping to see a lot more brought into the club between now and the end of the season. If COVID has had a huge impact on Aberdeen's finances, and we know it have because of what the club have said themselves, and you only have to look at that squad to see how threadbare it is. But I'm not convinced that just bringing in Stephen Glass as a like-for-like replacement for McInnes will actually work in the long term, because to replace Derek McInnes, Aberdeen need to have probably another head of recruitment, maybe some scouts, things like that, because the main issue under McInnes was that he was being asked to do far too much at the club.
I mean, James, it's a good point Stefan makes, but obviously, like he mentions as well, that it's been strongly suggested that Alan Russell will come to the club, and Scott Brown will also come, and I think that's also in a playing as well as coaching capacity. Is that not maybe? It could be argued that that's the start of maybe that build that Stefan's talking about, and maybe other things might be added later when finances are better, or when these three men are all in place. Or do you think it'd be more likely, if that was going to happen, we'd be seeing moves to have a kind of director of football / new recruitment system in place already before Stephen Glass and his kind of backroom staff came in?
Well, I mean, I get the impression from Dave Cormack that he does seem to be quite. He does his homework, I think, and I think he's quite thorough. In terms of his operations, and I think that he's, from what he said, you can tell he's quite ambitious as well. So yeah, I think that it will be a case of, they'll be looking. It might only be a 1-year deal initially for Glass, but they'll be looking to build something for the last few years. I mean, obviously that's what every club does when they hire a new manager. I take Stefan's point about McInnes was doing everything, and he probably needed a hand, and that's probably going to be true. But I mean, that is the case for a lot of managers in Scotland as well. Even in the Premiership, there are a lot of guys who do find themselves sort of doing everything. A little bit of everything anyway. So I think that, in terms of Scott Brown going to Aberdeen, I think that it'd be a good move for Brown. I think it'd be a good move for Celtic. Probably a good move for Aberdeen. I mean, I don't know. I think that it's a weird thing with Brown, because he's obviously. I think that he's good enough to play in the Premiership. I just don't think he's good enough to play for Celtic anymore. Certainly not regularly for Celtic. Not within the kind of system they want to play. Maybe at Aberdeen he's a wee bit better, and I think that having someone like him around, to sort of have a word with guys like McCrory and Ferguson would be, there's not really a better mentor you could have, I don't think, in terms of if you want someone to come in and take those guys under his wing. So I think it's an interest. It is really interesting. Personally, I think I don't know if Scott Brown would be up for it, but maybe he will. Maybe he's been told his contract's not getting renewed or whatever. I don't know anything about it, but I do think that it'd be a good move for Celtic. I think it'd be a good move for Brown. I'd say I'm not sure. Again, it's another gamble though from Aberdeen, isn't it? Because you're getting a guy who, okay, maybe only plays every second game, or plays last half hour games or whatever, and that's useful. But in terms of the coaching side of things, we don't know what Brown's sort of. We don't know what his pedigree is in that regard. You can see it in terms of on the pitch. He's clearly a leader and all that, and he's clearly very good at motivating and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of when it comes down to the nitty gritty of it, in terms of his tactical approach to games, or his philosophy, we don't know what that is, and it might not even necessarily marry up with Declan Glass. I mean, not Declan Glass, sorry, Stephen Glass. I mean, I would assume it does, and that's why. They're going to appoint him as his assistant, but again, it's just one of those. You do wonder if they could maybe use. I mean, it's the other assistant. What was his name again, Neil? Sorry,
Allan Russell.
Allan Russell. I mean, again, I'm not familiar with him. Is he a bit more experienced? He's
more like a kind of striker coach. I know he's the striker coach for the English national team.
Right. Oh well, we all know that Aberdeen dreadfully need a striker coach. So yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me. And by all accounts, by next season they're going to have any strikers left anyway, so they're going to have to buy some. So I think that the Brown thing, I think it would be box office. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and I'd definitely be looking forward to watching Aberdeen play Rangers. I think it's too early to say whether or not it'd be any good, because it's just there's so many unknowables at this stage.
Yeah, I think as well, of all the positions where they maybe needed a player manager, and I think Brown he potentially could bring something, but it's maybe the one position Aberdeen are quite strong in with McCrory and with even McGeoch, who I think we've still to see the best of McGeoch and Ferguson, and now I've just got visions of at least one of them doing the Bruni next season, and that's what the legacy will be rather than the Negre. I'm joking, but yeah, and you kind of mentioned there obviously James about there won't be any strikers there as things stand next season. I think that's a kind of good link into the challenges Stephen Glass and this team are going to face, because Andrew and I, when we did talk about McInnes leaving, I think we did an extra podcast the day or the day after he left. We kind of just went through looking at how many players are out of contract, and it is considerable. And obviously, yeah, the one that kind of stands out is Hornby, Canberry, and Hendry are all on loan, are likely all to return. Bruce Anderson's obviously on loan at Hamilton, but his contract's up, and I think unless he's given some reassurances, there's a good chance he'll leave, given his kind of time at Aberdeen's not been great the last couple of seasons. But even in defence, I think if I was correct, the only one that has a guaranteed contract is Considine for next season. I think there's a chance of Hernandez maybe coming back, but he wasn't really fancied when McInnes was there. But just how big a job does he have, Stefan? Because the problems in the final third are obviously well documented at the moment, but it's not just there. Aberdeen have looked pretty devoid of ideas this season, parts of the previous couple of seasons as well. It really is going to be a massive job. It's not a case of there's a decent core to the team, but it's not balanced.
Yeah, I mean, it's so bad it can almost be looked at as a positive, because he's basically had the slate wiped clean for him. That's how bare this Aberdeen team is. As you said, there's essentially no defence. He's got a front three of players on loan and who aren't really offering much at all. They'll all be gone as well, and he's really just got like 5 or 6 players who kind of play in the middle of the park to kind of work with. But there are a good number of players there to be, as you said. You've obviously got that kind of core of Ferguson and McCrory, kind of hoping that they don't kind of push for moves this summer, though you never really know, I suppose. I know there's kind of Johnny Hayes and Niall McGinn there. I'm not entirely sure someone like Glass will be coming in hoping to get the best out of them. I think I'd like to see him maybe get more out of Matty Kennedy. I think there's still more for Matty Kennedy that he could offer Aberdeen. Still remember him being a very good St Johnstone player. Again, I'll continue to kind of, beat the drum for Conor McLennan. I think he's a great young player who McInnes never got the best out of. And yeah, obviously after that there's very little, to be perfectly honest. There's Ryan Hedges as well, I suppose. So they need a striker. They probably need an entire back line. Maybe Bruce Anderson can kind of help out there with the former, but that is a huge worry, obviously. Maybe this is exactly why they've obviously decided to appoint a manager in March. It gives Glass, 7 or 8 games to kind of have a look around the squad, see what he's working with, and then he can really start doing his homework ahead of the transfer window. But this is obviously an opportunity for Aberdeen as well to kind of wipe their entire transfer policy wipe clean as well, because throughout McInnes' period in charge, he seemed to favour looking for deals and trying to pick up players from down south, and at times spend quite a lot of money on players, when I always kind of thought Aberdeen never really took full advantage of, basically the division that was sitting in front of them, or even the championship below them, where a club of Aberdeen's resources and the wage bill that they can offer players basically means that they can kind of pluck what they want as long as they get in ahead of, Hibs, Hearts, Celtic and Rangers. We've seen a number of clubs do this very well. Livingston do it very well, St Mirren do it very well, even Hibs do it very well now. Aberdeen should be front and foremost for any player in the championship, and it'd be interesting to see if Glass can kind of start doing some scouting around the SPFL and maybe pick up 4 or 5 players from around Scottish football to kind of fill these holes, rather than go down the route of McInnes basically looking to pick up senior players, expensive players that don't really have much of a sell-on value. I'd really like it if Aberdeen could kind of, I'm not going to go back down the route of moaning about the recruitment, but it'd be nice to see if they could kind of turn this oil tanker towards that kind of approach to, making the most of what's in their backyard and developing those young Scottish players and selling them on.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and as you say, I think there has to be a complete overhaul, and it kind of relates back to the point you say about if it's possible financially, then they probably should be looking at that kind of recruitment thing being put in place as well. James, I know this is something I actually meant to ask you earlier in the podcast, just maybe after we heard Andrew's speech, monologue, soliloquy. Is there anybody in your mind that Aberdeen have kind of missed out on here that they should have approached? Realistically, obviously, not listening really to the suggestions Andrew made in his clip, but are there any kind of obvious names you think that Aberdeen have perhaps overlooked that might have been, I was going to say safer, but more likely better options than Stephen Glass?
I mean, I don't know about better, but certainly I think I'd be surprised if Jim Goodwin's name wasn't quite high up that shortlist. I don't know if he'd actually want to go to Aberdeen at the moment. It seems like, I sort of get the impression at St Mirren that he's got another year or two there. I think he sort of sees himself as it's a bit of a project, and obviously they've had year-on-year improvement and all that kind of stuff. So obviously Aberdeen's a big job, but I wonder if Goodwin would actually be quite happy to stay put at St Mirren, given the fact that he's sort of now finally got a squad together. They've get a lot of guys that are young who are going to get better in the next couple of years, you'd hope. So you think that actually, I think the future for St Mirren looks pretty rosy, and whereas I think if you take the Aberdeen job, for instance, it's a bit of a gamble where that you're taking out on a club where the expectation is third every single season at the minimum, and to challenge in the cups, as we saw with McInnes, even that sometimes isn't enough. So I think that it is quite a demanding sport, but they should be demanding. Just given the size of the club and the financial advantages they enjoy compared to some of their contemporaries. So yeah, I think as I say, I think Goodwin's probably the only person that came to mind for me. I don't think there were many sort of front runners or obvious candidates, but that's just my take.
No, fair enough. Just before we wrap things up, Stefan, what about yourself? I know I think it was again on that podcast we did, I put it to Andrew about Stephen Robinson, for example, and he was quite strong in saying that he definitely preferred the option of Stephen Glass over Stephen Robinson. Is that something that you think maybe would have been a good fit, Robinson in Aberdeen?
Well, if Andrew thinks Robinson was a bad idea, then he almost certainly would have been a good idea. I was actually led to believe by one person that Robinson did actually throw his hat into the ring for the Aberdeen job. So I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I'd be quite surprised if they did reject it out of hand. But I guess at this point in his career, straight off the back of an upsetting season at Motherwell, then he wouldn't have been a popular decision. It'd probably been quite hard to sell to the Aberdeen support. I think all things being equal, I think he would have done a really good job at Aberdeen. I think he's a great manager, but I can understand the kind of optics behind appointing him wouldn't have really worked. I can understand the same with Goodwin. I think Goodwin could quite easily leapfrog Aberdeen, to be perfectly honest, in the managerial sense, off the back of what he's doing at St Mirren. I guess these things, whenever we do discuss these things, I do wonder, I don't really have any suggestions. I do kind of fall back in the idea that it's not my job to come up with suggestions. It's Aberdeen's, or when we're talking about Scotland, or when we're talking about Celtic, it's the chief executives of these organisations to do their own homework and really cast a net far and wide to find these guys. I think Goodwin and I think Robinson would have been great Aberdeen appointments, to be perfectly honest with you, but they're going down this path with Stephen Glass, and I guess they'll have to live or die by this appointment.
We'll leave it there then. As usual, thank you so much for listening, and if you haven't already, if you could leave us a review on iTunes, we'd really appreciate it, or recommend us to any of your friends who are interested in Scottish football. And as usual, if you want to check out what's on the site this week, just head over to the Substack. You can find all the links to it with Stefan's lovely graphics as well over on our Twitter at TheTwoPointOne. We'll see you later. Cheers.